as we begin that conversation, we have to look at what the governor has already decided to do with the education budget. And there are major cuts coming.
Yeah, it's a very stark view of what could happen here in the next budget year, the budget year that begins on July 1st. So to backtrack it a little bit even further, even before the governor laid out his plans for covering K-12 cuts, you saw the state report its revenue figures on Thursday, and the April revenue figures are down significantly from what was projected before the coronavirus outbreak. A huge drop-off in tax collections between income taxes and sales taxes, and that's the crux of where the state gets its money for education. It comes from income taxes and it comes from sales taxes, and when those tax collections are down, well, guess what? You're going to have to cut the education budget. Now, how much they'll have to cut, how bad is the revenue drop-off, we still don't know yet. But we know that there's the potential for some very significant cuts in education. And that's what Governor Little laid out on Friday. He laid out a plan for if we have to cut 5% from the K-12 budget, which is about $99 million, where do those cuts come? The big pieces, freezing teacher salaries on the career ladder, cutting $10 million out of the technology line item. We can talk a little bit more about that. Doing some cuts in a variety of other line items, kind of leaving intact, though, the literacy line item, which we know has been a big priority for Governor Little, since his election in 2018.
So, Kevin, one of the questions or comments we're getting right now, even on Facebook, is saying, Richard Georgia Hernandez saying, we are going to lose a lot of good teachers. And when you're talking about teachers not getting pay raises and facing a world that is so uncertain for them, is that an accurate comment that somebody's making? Is this going to have a trickle-down effect where we might even have a bigger gap in getting teachers on board?
Well, it does this much. If you have to freeze teacher salaries this year, what it does at the very least is it slows down the momentum that Idaho had been trying to build up over the past several years to boost those teacher salaries. And in this case, we're talking about trying to boost teacher salaries for veteran teachers. The veteran teachers that school administrators and state policymakers know you really want to keep. These are the veterans, these are the leaders within a school, and they've been largely left behind with the pay raises of the past few years. So if you freeze salaries, if you freeze this chapter of the career ladder pay raises, it's definitely going to slow down that momentum. What happens in terms of a teacher exodus? That's really hard to predict because other states are going to be facing similar financial plights. What they do to combat the budget issues that they're going to face, that's hard to predict too. But it's not like Idaho is in an economic vacuum here. All other states are dealing with downturns stemming from the coronavirus outbreak. So, do teachers automatically leave Idaho for other jobs in other states? I think it's a little bit too early to say. But certainly a freeze in teacher salaries comes at a point where the state was hoping to build on the momentum that they had started to build up over the past few years.
And I think that's where, when I use the word denial, when we started making the grade here live on Facebook, that's where it has to be for so many people. And I think in the education world in particular, because Idaho had really finally seen a rebound when it came to education spending and whether or not teachers, especially as you said, veteran teachers, were going to see those pay raises finally. And now all of a sudden we've come to that screeching halt. Why now did the governor put this out? Can we bring people up to speed about how big the education budget is, what 5% really means in this term, and why now? Why did he need to give this out so that what districts have to plan for?
I think what we're trying to do here is get the word out to school administrators of what to expect if a significant budget cut is going to be necessary. He wanted to give school superintendents an idea of what they're looking at as they start to make decisions at the local level, because this is the time of year when local school administrators have to decide how they're going to spend the money that they're going to get, how they're going to negotiate with the local teachers unions, what sort of master contract are they going to put into place. Because as we talk about teacher salaries, and we talk about what the state puts into teacher salaries, it's so important to remember that the state really does not set the teacher salary schedule. With the exception of setting a minimum salary, every other salary decision is made at the local level. So what Governor Little was trying to do here, I think, was signal to school administrators, as you go to the bargaining table, as you talk to your local teachers and try to come up with a contract for the year coming forward, you have to plan for the possibility that there's going to be a significant cut in state funding. And one of the areas that the governor feels like he has to cut is the support for teacher pay raises. So I think he's trying to get the message to school administrators of this is what we're up against. This is what we could be looking at as early as July 1st when the new budget year kicks in.
I want to take you back to what you had said was one of the line items, which I know you're looking into for a story possibly for later this week, and that is a cut in technology, which, as you and I are now sitting here using technology for making the grade and going live via Facebook, which we always love to do. Technology is a brilliant thing, and there's a whole new appreciation for it when it comes to parents doing remote learning. So when I saw that line item being cut, I know that you're trying to figure out what that really means, and does it fly in the face of kind of what we're dealing with right now and what parents are going to have to deal with?
Well, so what the governor's talking about here in terms of the technology line item, this is $36 million right now that goes to schools to purchase computers, to expand broadband capability. The governor's talking about cutting $10 million out of that line item. And as you say, I'm working on a story on this that I probably will have published on Wednesday, but just kind of a sneak preview. What the governor's office is saying here is that there are ways to offset this cut in state funding for technology. And we've talked about these offsets before, that there is federal money coming in from the $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus law. There's $48 million roughly that comes to Idaho public schools. So the governor's office is hoping that some of that money will help offset cuts in the technology line item, that there are other ways to maybe to fill in some of those gaps while providing some spending flexibility at the local level. So the more I learn about it, at least from where the governor's office is coming from, this is not a let's cut technology funding by $10 million in the middle of a pandemic when parents and kids are relying on that technology as the lifeline that connects them to their schools. So what we'll wind up spending on technology and how we wind up spending it on technology, again, it's going to be a local decision to a large extent. So, to say that this is a $10 million cut in technology isn't really telling the whole story.
Well, especially when we've talked about how the State Board of Education is perhaps looking at doing an online learning platform for the entire state and trying to purchase a system should schools be closed still in the fall. And if that money comes from the feds and some of the CARES Act and how that all happens.
Using some of that federal money to try to prepare for more of a holistic approach to online learning in the fall. If you need to have online learning in the fall, if you need to have some school closures somewhere along the way during the next school year, planning for that possibility.
Yes, it's almost too much to even think about. As a parent, as I've said, I want to bring in Kira's giving us a couple of good comments here. She says, we've definitely seen how important education is lately, right? If you didn't know already, I think everybody's gotten a big glimpse of that. And she said the last thing we need is less money going to education. And then there's another comment here talking about whether or not teachers could strike over this, Kevin. And I think people are just saying that there are frustrations out there, and as we are all seeing. So I think what happens, how this unfolds over the course of the negotiation period is going to be fascinating to watch. And does that have any relation to the school elections that are going to be happening in May and the levies that schools are going to be asking for?
Well, it does kind of put more of a spotlight on the districts that are going to voters next week. People are voting right now on school elections. Here I'm thinking about West Ada, Middleton, and Mountain Home are the three districts closest to home that have levy elections on the ballot. West Ada will talk about its levy election and say this is $14 million a year. It's about 5% of their budget. And that's money that helps, they say helps keep teachers in the classroom, helps keep class sizes as manageable as you can get them. Districts have been counting on these supplemental levies for years, maybe counting on them even more in a time when state funding may be up in the air.
As we continue to take Facebook comments, we'll continue to have this discussion about K-12 budget cuts and what could happen in the future for the state of education for K-12. Kevin, I want to take you now to higher education as well, because you have been writing stories about the budget cuts going on at Boise State and now just recently at idahoednews.org. If you want to read these stories in full, you started talking about the University of Idaho and what they are going to now face. This isn't just a K-12 issue. This is a higher education budget crisis as well.
It's definitely a crisis at the higher education level. And what the University of Idaho is looking at, what President Scott Green laid out in an email to staff on Monday, is the idea of mandatory staff furloughs. And the amount of hours that a staffer has to take in terms of furlough, that's going to depend on their salary. His proposal is that every employee takes at least 24 hours of furlough between the end of June and January, if this goes into effect. And it's not in effect yet, it's a proposal at this point. His hope is to save about $3.3 million from staff furloughs and try to save staff positions in the process. But a $3.3 million furlough, again, going back to that 5% budget cut that we were just talking about for K-12, well, a 5% budget cut for the University of Idaho in terms of their general fund appropriation is about $4.7 million. So the furloughs don't get you all the way there. They don't cover all of that cut. They cover a good chunk of the cut, and that's what Green is saying in his memo to staff, but it doesn't get you all the way there. So we'll see now what happens with that proposal if that goes into effect, but it's certainly not a unique situation to the University of Idaho. We talked about Boise State. Idaho State is looking at similar cuts in staff, in the money that goes into staffing, whether that's leaving positions dark, eliminating positions, furloughs as well, all driven partly by the possibility of state budget cuts, but also driven by the possibility of enrollment drop-offs, because nobody can know right now how many students are going to show up on campus this fall, or how many are going to return.
One of the questions coming up on Facebook right now, Kevin, to us is, are these furloughs also being taken by administrators? I think a lot of people wanting to know what's happening at the top.
Yes, they are being taken by all employees, and higher paid staff, so more administrative staff, would take more hours of furlough. So I think the variation that Green was talking about in his memo is that staffers are going to take between like a 1% cut in salary up to about a 6% cut in salary through the furloughs. So higher paid employees would take a bigger chunk of the hit here in terms of the furloughs as he's laid them out, as he's proposing them.
And Marlene Tromp did the exact same thing at Boise State, saying that she was going to take more time, although it wasn't exactly outlined what she would need to do, but that's true as well at Boise State.
Again, yes, she's expecting her administrative team to take to take more furlough hours than rank and file staff.
All right, let's talk about a little bit of positive money news, perhaps, especially to higher education students, because as you and I talked about a few weeks ago, part of the CARES Act allowed for money to go directly to universities for them to give directly to students. In fact, half of the money they were given by the federal government had to go directly to students to help them. And you've been working on stories trying to figure out how this money is going to get distributed to students at all the universities along all levels. What have you found out so far? Because the money has trickled in.
The money is there, and the money is now available for colleges and universities to distribute to students. So to backtrack a little bit, part of this federal stimulus law is going to provide about $36 million to Idaho's colleges and universities. It's public colleges and universities. And at least half of that money is supposed to go directly to students. It's supposed to help offset losses, financial hardships that students have incurred because of the coronavirus outbreak. So that's the money that's supposed to go out first. And that money is now available to the colleges and universities. They've laid out their plans for how they're going to distribute the money. Had a lot of latitude here. The feds did not give a whole lot of, did not have a lot of restrictions about how colleges and universities distributed the money. The State Board of Education didn't really have to sign off either. They just wanted to see the plans. And what we're seeing in the plans is most of the colleges and universities are trying to get a greater share of that money to students who are in greatest need, students who are maybe low-income students who are who are going to be feeling the effects of the financial hit from coronavirus more directly than other students. So we kind of laid out how the various colleges and universities are going to distribute that money.
Was there anything surprising to you as you were doing your research into that story?
Not terribly, because again, the colleges and universities had the choice of they could do something that was more across the board, and there are some dollars that are going to be distributed across the board, but by and large, the bulk of that money is going to go to students who are receiving federal financial aid already of one form or another. Students who are expected, because of their income, because of their family income, to be able to pay less. They can afford to pay less for their college. Those students are going to get a higher percentage of the money.
Well, we have a lot to watch. I mean, education is always busy, and you and I know that, covering this beat as journalists, but it has taken a turn that obviously nobody could see coming. And it's going to be fascinating to see how Idaho rebounds when it comes to its education platform.
Right, and what happens not just with the money, we've talked a lot about the money this week because that's been kind of the order of the day, but you still have questions about how are schools going to get through the next few weeks? Are schools going to do kind of the small group learning that we've been talking about in the past to try to help students who are at risk? You have, one charter school in Fruitland hoping to reopen their doors entirely next week, and we'll watch and see how that plays out. We had the story that our colleagues at the Twin Falls Times News broke late last week about Minico High School hoping to have a full-blown graduation ceremony at the high school next week. So there is a lot happening on the education beat, and it's all, obviously it's all tied to the coronavirus pandemic and the fallout from the pandemic.
Well, as always, we appreciate the work that all of you are doing at Idaho Education News, and many of those stories get reposted at Idaho News 6, but of course, the place to go to read all of these is idahoednews.org.